Welcome to another Red Dice Diaries video RPG review, and in this video I'm going to be reviewing the recently released Fate RPG Toolkit. And you'll have to forgive me during this video if I occasionally look off screen, since I've only got a PDF copy of the toolkit at the moment, so I've got it open in a tiny little window just off screen that I'm referencing as I talk. Now this review is going to be a little different from some of the other videos I've done on the channel, since the RPG Fate Toolkit is not designed to be used as a whole book. It's not a single core rule system as with many of the other books I've reviewed. It's more a collection of house rules and alternatives for you to use in your game. I think the designers of the book and the writers would be the first to admit that if you attempted to use everything out of the toolkit, your game would be an unholy mess. It's not meant to be used that way. It's meant so that you can pick little individual bits that suit your game out of it. After all, what suits your game might not suit my game, might not suit the next person's game. But I think that in an RPG, you can never have too many options. It's always good to have more ideas so that you can narrow down precisely to what suits your particular game. And you should never be afraid or bothered about jettisoning anything that doesn't suit your particular game. After all, just because something's right for me, it might not be right for you. So let's have a little look at the contents page of the book. I'm not going to go into all the sections in detail because there's so much in this book that even after reading it 2 or 3 times all the way through, every time I look at it I'm still finding new potential ways I could use bits of the information or new little nuggets of ideas tucked away. So on to the contents. We have a section that deals with aspects and how they can be tweaked in game in terms of how the invocations and the compelling of aspects can be altered and what effect that might have on your game. There's also a discussion of how you can tie aspects into a particular genre or a particular session or campaign, as well as how aspects can help determine the power level of your campaign. The next chapter concerns skills and how the skill list can be changed, added to, subtracted from, tweaked or altered. There's even reference to professions and the approaches from Fate Accelerated and how these changes may affect your game. The next chapter looks at stunts, and there's all manner of new ideas for creating balanced stunts, as well as it talks about how tweaking the cost of stunts and changing the amount of refresh that a character has at the start of the game may affect the power level of your game and have knock-on effects elsewhere. The next section is titled The Big Game and talks about dramatic presentation during the game and includes a lot of different potential options for generating a character, such as using professions, fantasy races, and creating an origin story for potentially the more sort of superheroic or epic type of games. There's also a particularly compelling section which discusses using aspect-based compels prior to a session as a source of adventure hooks, and how potentially by offering the players a reward of a fate point to have their aspect featured, their compel featured as the main plot of a session, you can generate a continual stream of ideas for your game. And this is a very useful thing, I think, since a lot of GMs are quite overworked to have minimal time to plan for sessions, or if indeed you're picking up for a one-off game, which is a strength of fates, this advice could be extremely useful to help you get the ball rolling, especially if you're sitting down with a group of players. They've just gendered a random assortment of characters. You can look at their aspects and boom, 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 start generating your plot. The section also has some useful advice on how the various aspects of a game, skills, refresh, stunts, etc., can be used to portray a certain power level of game, from the very top of the high-level epic superheroic games down through the middle to the lowest and the grittiest of games that you could desire. The section on special circumstances comes next, and that talks about things like chases, social conflicts, character motivations, and challenges. And there's some very useful advice in there. The next chapter is on customized tools, which deals with stress, consequences, movement through zones and restrictions, how you can use tighter zones to create drama, and how you can vary the number of zones in order to vary the pacing of a scene. One of the examples given is in a horror game, you may use more zones than you typically would in order to create the feeling of exploration and of that long hallway that seems to stretch out forever that the protagonist runs down, so beloved of a number of different horror films. The game also talks about how you can use different dice if you don't have, or you don't want to use for some reason, the default Fate dice, and what effect this would have on the probability of your rolls. There's also a number of house rules dealing with sidekicks and allies, having wealth as an additional stress level, and a few different suggestions for how weapons and armor could be represented. Now, the weapons and armor representation is a little crunchy for me. I prefer to abstract these things out unless it's something of world-shaking importance, in which case I'd use an aspect or a stunt. However, the option is there for those who want a little more crunch in their Fate games. The next section is sure to be the most interesting for a number of people. It certainly was for myself, and that is because it deals with magic. Now, magic was only very slightly dealt with in the Fate core book. However, in here there are numerous different systems which suggest different ways that magic can be used. And indeed, there's also advice on using the basic elements present in the Fate system to reflect certain magical powers, and how these different aspects of magic can affect other parts of your game. Next come a number of optional subsystems, that deal with things like kung fu, cyberware, squad-based warfare, mass combat, swashbuckling duels, superpowers, etc. Now, these systems aren't strictly necessary, and you can pretty much accomplish any of these things with a mixture of stunts and aspects. However, for those people who do want a little bit more crunch or a dedicated subsystem, it's nice to have that option there in a balanced format. The final part of this section is the most interesting for me, and it talks about how to run a Fate horror game, which may seem like a bit of a contradiction in terms, since Fate is designed as a heroic setting where all of the player characters are fairly competent in their areas of expertise, whereas strictly speaking, the protagonists of horror aren't as proactive, aren't as powerful as a typical Fate game would make the characters. However, the book does offer some extremely useful advice on how you can create a horror feel in a Fate game. And the advice it gives is that to create an atmosphere, you should use plenty of compels and take full advantage of the idea that when someone draws or loses a challenge, they can still succeed, but there will be severe consequences for this. And you should really play up those consequences to create the dark, oppressive atmosphere that's present in a lot of horror. I think this advice is extremely good. Obviously, there's more stuff in there than the brief flavour I've given you, but certainly if you're going to run a horror game, I'd recommend having a look at it. So that's basically the rough contents of the Fate System Toolkit. Obviously, I can't go into everything in there, or this video would be massively long. However, my verdict on the book is that if you're buying it expecting to use everything in the book, you will be disappointed. However, this book, like the Fate Accelerated and the Fate Core rulebook, is pay what you like. You pay what you think is a valid price for this book. So it's available fairly cheaply or reasonably priced, although I'd certainly recommend you consider giving the minimal amount suggested on the Evil Hat Productions website, since this is a quality book that will provide you with so much optional extra rules that you'll continue getting use out of it for years and years to come in your Fate games. Chances are, if you think of a problem, or you need a certain rule system, or you need an alternate way of doing something, that if it's not in this toolkit, which is unlikely given the amount of information in it, that there will be something similar enough in this Fate toolkit that you can easily adapt it to suit your own needs and the needs of your game. So for that reason, if not for any other, and there are other reasons, such as the fact the book's extremely well written, it's extremely clearly laid out, and everything is laid out in a logical order. It has a good index and a good contents page. But putting all that aside, I would still recommend it just for the sheer volume of information in it. As I said, I've read through it 2 or 3 times, and even now I'm finding little bits during the course of this review that I'd either not noticed before or that I'd not considered, and that are now sparking off new ideas for games. If you imagine the writers of this book have got a load of different people together, got them all to submit a jumble of different ideas and their own house rules. They've buffed off the rough edges, polished it up a lot, and presented it in an easy to read format here for you to make the decisions about what to take from this book and what elements to use from it in your own game. Then you'd have a very good idea of what the Fate Toolkit's about. And it certainly shows just how versatile the Fate system is. And for the reasonable price that it's available at, you can't really ask for more. I'd certainly recommend for anyone planning to run a Fate game that you give this book a look. It may spark off some additional ideas, it may create some interesting avenues for exploration, and may lead your game down paths that you've not previously expected. So if you have any comments on the Fate Toolkit or on this video, please leave them in the box below. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you've enjoyed that and the others, that you'll consider clicking on subscribe to be kept up to date with all the latest videos and news on my channel. And until I see you on the next video, I'll look forward to reading what you write. Thanks for watching.